Thank
There we
you.
go.
So Joe and Ren, I leave you to it.
Sweet. Isn't everybody else gonna leave or? Hi you guys, so my name's Joe Ferris and I'm from Willsboro. And I've been a caricature artist like part-time for close to 10 years. And I attended a college called the Center for Cartoon Studies in White River Junction, Vermont. I graduated with a class of like 21, something like that. But it's a really good school, and though the school is mostly based in comic book making, I am not making comics these days, but I am making a living drawing caricatures. So I don't use the same tools that a lot of caricature artists use. Growing up in the North Country, I find that I'm one of the only caricature artists in our region, I think. So I had the privilege recently of meeting a bunch of caricature artists when I went to the Champlain Valley Expo, which is still going in Vermont. And there was a whole gang of them, and I was told I could not be a caricature artist at it, as I called up like, you know, a little kid like, hey, can I come draw caricatures at your fair? And they're just like, no, you already got guys. And so anyways, but I went anyways, not sure what was going to happen. And so I got to meet a bunch of caricature artists, women and men, and they are really good. And I like got to see what tools they use and everything. So it was really interesting. But I'm using like old fashioned stuff pretty much. So I'm using, just let me know if I'm talking too long, if I need to get to it.
Go for it.
All right.
We're spellbound.
All right. Well, I'll go until you tell me otherwise. So I'm gonna do a black and white character. I could do color because I do have, it's almost like mini crayons, but like higher quality sort of, without like a lot of wax in it. So I got like those things that I could use, but I was thinking I'd rather show you guys what I do more regularly. Because that's like, this is how I've made money, essentially. So you guys, I'm doing regular black ink that I got from Michael's, and I'm gonna use some ink wash, which is just water with ink. Inexpensive materials for this job. So feel free to ask questions throughout this.
You often talk and demonstrate how you're doing your.
No, I mean I talk. You know, it's funny, like being a caricature artist, I feel like it's kind of like being a hairdresser or maybe a bartender. It's like you talk, it's like kind of an individual connection, and then you do something for them, and then you share it with them. Can like a nice haircut. This isn't gonna be nice. Just kidding.
It's also fume free. Some of those pens,
What?
crazy fumes, the pens that people use.
Oh, with caricatures? Yeah, I haven't experienced that, but I bet you that's true. All right, so. All right, so I'm gonna look at her, and can you look right here for me? So I'm gonna start with what's called a 3/4 view. So rather than just the direct front on or a side profile, I'm going for 3/4 view. So like people think it's more elegant, like from the deer in the headlights type look. So that's what I'm going. It's a little harder, a little more like complex, but after doing it a ton of times, it gets easier. So I'm not going to do any pencil before inking. some caricature artists do some penciling and then they ink. And I think that's probably a great method, and things might turn out better, but I've just gotten in the habit of going straight to ink. So I'm gonna do it that way. You don't want to take long. Like there were like three things that caricature artists kind of defined a good caricature as. One was it's done pretty quickly. Two, it resembles the person to a degree. And three, I think like there's a kind of a comical element. You know, it's not overly serious. So see if I can do that. All right, I usually start with the top of the head. And an important thing is to place it on the page like good, because you guys know as artists and photographers, it's like if you don't put it in the right spot, that kind of ruins it. So as I look at her, a couple things I'm gonna try to play with or exaggerate a little bit are the glasses. She's got big black glasses on, and those do well to distinguish the person and identify them as that individual. So thank you for wearing those big glasses. So like me, she's, do you mind me talking about your features? Is that, just let me know if I start to embarrass you. Like me, like she has kind of a, what's it called, like Abraham Lincoln nose. Like a nose that, you know, is strong.
You have a beautiful mouth.
You got a nice nose.
You have a lovely aura.
Oh, my sister used to make fun.
Oh, my sister made fun of all. I have 5 older sisters. It was just brutal.
Oh my
And
goodness.
hair mainly is brutal. And
But you're over.
yeah, fine. To make me eat her dirty socks. That's what she did.
But she would sozzle up the Jello and make me drink it.
Yellow?
Liquid Joe.
Wait, Jello?
I think you have to do-
No.
No, Jello.
I think you have
It's
to.
edible.
She would sozzle it up.
What does that mean?
What does that mean? Yes. In her mouth.
She would put it in her mouth and then put it in your mouth like a bird.
Sisters do freak.
Yeah. Well, some or others make them eat their dirty socks. Hers was edible. Oh, it was. Big fan for that.
So.
How much older is she then?
Smile.
So was part of your training flattering?
No.
No.
No. So, I mean, so the school I went to did not like specifically do any training in caricatures. It was like all comic book,
Yeah.
all sequential storytelling. Just smile. That's one thing you got to do a lot is tell people to smile in caricatures. Yeah, unfortunately. I mean, unless somebody like Martha.
Viewer, move it up higher.
It doesn't go up higher.
No.
It's an imperfect solution.
Well, we're in the room, so you can just
Smile.
keep complaining.
Smile. Might as well just keep the smile if you can. I know it.
Tim, tell some more jokes. Yeah. Oh, I can tell.
Yeah, you could tell us some.
Okay.
Yeah.
I found a steady stream of income I've made over the years. by selling a homing pigeon on eBay. Oh, wait, oh, wait. Okay.
It's only a home, yes. It wasn't funny.
It's kind of like a death. Tell us a joke.
I'm making her laugh all this time. I did it on purpose because both together. I was a big Italian. I'm very, very sensitive. That's why I didn't put my name in there. I'm like, I've got two Italian and nose caricature. I basically am a caricature. Just my face. So I was making light. That'd be my nose.
I first met Joe when we had our art party in December of last year. Some of you were, I think, at the garagerie underneath Grizzle Teas. And Joe shows up with his pad and he's just this smiling, cheerful, pleasant guy. And as I recall, Joe, you pointed at me and said, "Come, let me draw you."
Yeah,
Yeah. And I felt so special.
that's nice.
And people watched as he was doing it, and he's doing the same thing to me. Smile, smile. But it was really cool how many people then wanted their caricatures done, and you were so busy after that whole evening, one after another.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a very popular.
I've been seeing your work now.
This looks so much how I feel.
Little devilish.
No, a little like,
Oh, yeah, you're able to watch it. That's so
Yeah.
funny. That's interesting. Usually people have to wait until the end.
I told Joe before we started that found him on YouTube and look entertained watching some videos. It's really great. And he's a talented musician. He did a rap song. And that was really entertaining. Yeah. So I subscribe and
I saw a movie recently where this woman had gotten broken up with and she was really heartbroken.
Yeah.
She was at the fair and she sat down, not realizing that it was a caricatures too. And I took this picture of her sobbing.
oh, that's fun.
It was actually
Cookies. Okay. Maybe more stuff right now.
I like the slightly demented twist.
I like it a lot.
Yeah.
Be afraid, Peter. Be very afraid.
It's capturing an inner Ren. The confidence with that brush amazes me.
So I feel like a lot of artists would rather, do their own thing behind closed doors, but for some reason I'm one of those artists that like enjoys performance. Like I like being on stages, I like that attention. So for me, like caricatures works out well because that's the environment.
I once took a job among caricature artists. I really wasn't as talented to do the job. And it was a place called Custom Card. And people could get a custom-made card with a caricature of their loved one for about $19, $20-something. It'd be done quick.
Mhm.
And those caricature artists made flattering caricatures of their subjects. I mean, I was doing it alongside them, following their model. And they did it a little bit wrong. I once did an event with one of these guys, and I wasn't nearly as good as him. And I was literally sweating because of the pressure of delivering
Something I've noticed about your work, Joe, is that you do a good job of capturing African-American skin. It's not easy to do. in
Oh, yeah.
A black and white format.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, there's definitely some challenges, like if you're drawing, kids can be hard because especially when they're super young, all of them look alike. And then, drawing elderly people can be tricky. Honestly, because, you gotta make it look like them, but not be like over the top and offend them. And then, also drawing, oh yeah, like people like Brad Pitt, like people with or Superman, like people with extremely symmetrical like faces that don't have a lot of character or variation. That can, I mean, that's kind of boring. Like I would, if I could draw anyone else other than those people, I'd rather do that.
Have you ever caricatured yourself?
Yep. I'm usually pretty mean.
Didn't look like you.
Some of them did, some of them didn't. So I've watched a good amount of YouTube videos to learn some tricks, and then also just looking at what other caricature artists are doing is helped me out too.
Yeah, negative reactions to the end product.
Yeah, for sure. Yep, I've gotten negative feedback. I've never had somebody like yell at me, but I have experienced people just kind of like standoffish or quiet or something like that. But yeah, it's like you learn, you get a feeling for like when somebody's like actually happy with what you did, and then when somebody's like yeah, all right, I'll pay for it, I guess. All right. What is your name?
Ren, R-E-N.
Okay, I'm gonna put Ren's name on it just so she feels extra special. I find the amount of time you have to do a caricature is usually the amount of time you'll take. So if I'm in like a crunch situation, I could pump these out really quickly. If I'm not, then I'll just go on and on.
I'll let you know when to stop.
Okay. I'm feeling a lot of love coming from Ren. Very good vibes. So giving her some hearts.
This is such a pleasure to watch.
Oh. All right. So. I also teach caricature drawing classes in case anybody interested in trying their hand at it.
Where do you do that?
I've done it at several places. I did one at the Strand in Plattsburgh. I did one at Old Soul, which is a kind of cool artsy bar in Plattsburgh.
Where?
It's on Margaret Street.
It's called Old Soul.
Old Soul. Yep.
You're doing a workshop for us this fall,
Yeah,
artworks.
yep.
Was that,
I don't think I've found a place for it yet. Maybe Blue Sea. That's the obvious choice.
Okay, you guys, so now I'm gonna go to ink wash, just to kind of give some depth to the picture. You'll see me use my own hand just to smudge things and move them around. So how's your day been, Ren?
is that India ink or something alcohol based or what?
It's just India ink,
How long does it take to dry?
not long. The water will take, this water with ink will take longer than the ink itself.
Yeah, but you got your finger going right over the solid black and it's not smearing with rust.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's, you could probably pick up the ink in some places, but it's pretty much dry.
You're getting more glamorous, Ren.
Photograph develop.
I heard of this place. So it's like a part bar, part, I'm not sure if it's a bar, they sell beer, but I don't know if you can drink it on premises or not. That's hard. But it's an artisan market and brewery where they sell predominantly regional.
Where do you live, Joe?
I live in Willsboro. Yeah, where I grew up. Currently trying to save up money to buy my own place. It's my goal. It's not as fast as the artist pension.
Yes.
Nice.
Is that her thin neck?
That is her neck, believe it or not. Yeah, so caricatures are pretty much like bobbleheads, usually.
Yeah.
Some artists don't make their people bobbleheads, but the point of the caricature is to put a lot of emphasis on the face. Like that's the heart of it. So so that's kind of why it's like the whole body shrinks and it's all about the face, the head, the character.
Cool.
Yeah. Right. Do you have freckles? No. I'm still at it. All right. Ta-da!
It's to be signed though by the
That
artist.
is a good point.
How do you sign pictures?
So I actually started signing Joe Ferris art because that's what I go by. And if I'm doing an art piece that like a long duration art piece, like a watercolor or like a actual like charcoal portrait or something, I'll sign it with my signature. But because I'm, you know, in the business of making income with my caricatures, I want my name to be spread with my art. So that's what I do. I want people to be able to read it.
That's up, cards.
All right. All right. Thanks for letting me draw you.
Thank you.
Nice job.
Very brave. Very brave.
That was fun.
No?
It looks so much better in the pen.
Look different on
Yeah,
the
doesn't
tablet
it?
than-
Yeah.
That is incredible.
You're welcome. All right, it's still a bit wet.
Less than I expected to have.
You can leave now.
Well, another round of applause for Joe. Thank you very much. And while you're cleaning up, I'm going to turn it over to our incredible panel. I've given them all guidance about not talking too long. And we'll help them because, well, we don't want it to go all night, but we want it to go long enough. So I'd like you each to give your name, your artistic output, your current profession, and a fact about yourself that might be interesting and might not. And why don't we start with Lester?
Okay, my name is Lester Parker, and I'm retired from a few other things these days, and I'm working out of an outfit that I call Records, and I'm doing music production, recording in-house, but mostly doing remote recording in other places, or working with recordings that other people have done a basic recording and bring to me. The title recording engineer is a little bit collapsed. If you think about what I do, there's three basic elements to the production. There is recording itself. We set up microphones, do that, and get music tracks recorded. And then there is mixing. Mixing engineering is a whole different practice than the recording thing, and a lot of people specialize in just one or the other. And so the mix is when you take the raw recordings and turn it into something that sounds a lot like what the record's going to sound like. And then the third element is what they call mastering, and that's sort of a dark art in some ways. There's a lot of people that are specialized mastering engineers, and that you take the mix and turn it into something that's ready for being on the record or being on the radio or, you know, in a streaming service, which has certain standards that are required. So each step you're trying to take what the artist, which may be yourself, because I record my own material, trying to take what the artist is doing and make it better and more like what their vision is. You're always trying to serve the music. So that's, that's the practice, and I don't know what the fact, I don't know. Surprising fact, I don't know what that is. I was an executive for a long time in the human services business, which even though I started music really early, sort of kept me away from music as much as I would have liked for a number of decades. And it was really fun to get back into it at the depth I've been able to do over the last 8 or 10 years. That's who I am these days.
So I'm Nathalie, and I'm the executive director of the Adirondack Center for Writing. I'm here in the capacity, I think, of a storyteller. And the fun fact about me is that this is self-serving, actually, so that I can explain. I have face blindness. Like, whenever I say that, people are like, "Oh, I'm bad with faces too." This is more than that. It takes me years to recognize people, so I lie every day. I usually pretend to recognize people, but I have face blindness.
What is it again?
Face blindness.
The face line.
Yeah, I truly, people think that just means you're not good at faces, but it takes me really years. I recognize both of you now, but most likely I didn't for years before you realized that I didn't actually know who you were. Like, I just can't, I don't know what it is. I can't recognize people at all. Or sometimes I think I recognize people, and like my best friend's husband, I chatted this guy up and was like, and then when he left, I texted my friend, I was like, "Oh, I just saw him skiing." She's like, "No, he didn't. He's in Syracuse today." And I was like, "Oh no, I talked to him." She's like, "I know him. He wasn't, like, I don't."
I'm sorry.
And I know this guy, like, he's my friend's husband, and I can't. But I like to tell people as often as possible, because people get really offended when I don't recognize them. It's not a character value thing, but I just can't recognize people.
Tim Fortune. I have a studio gallery in downtown Saranac Lake, and this is my 29th year. I either feel good about that or feel very old about that. But fun fact I just realized is I had that type of situation, studio gallery combination, for 40 years, because I combined that with when I lived in Florida for 16 years. All those years, I had the same situation in the studio gallery. So I taught full-time during the day, grades 2 through 8. Instruction papers, and then at by 3 o'clock, I'd be at the studio. So that combination kind of followed me throughout my career. To bind, and then I beat myself off of teaching. I'm an artist. Yeah, I'm gonna move back in.
Okay.
That was it.
Oh, that was it?
That's not fun.
Well,
Rude.
you want me to tell you another joke?
I'm Mark Kurtz. I'm a photographer. I have a studio gallery in downtown Saranac Lake. And when I say studio gallery, I don't do the traditional studio. Somebody comes in, poses, you put lights on them and stuff like that. That's, I say studio because that's where I do all my work. But I'm primarily a location photographer. I go on location to do the photography I need. And I tell people when they come in, excuse the mess, but it's a working studio. And people find that interesting. They would rather come in and see the place, the mess that it is, than all picked up and neat and
You
looking.
tell yourself that. They like it messy.
I feel good about that.
Natalie knows more than anybody because Natalie and I kind of co-shared the office space where I am now for several years. Fortunately, we got along pretty well.
To this point.
That just changed a minute ago. That's because she didn't recognize me. No wonder you gave me that blank stare. Fun fact
Why
is,
is he invading my space?
I'm a full certified ski instructor,
Oh,
but not teaching professionally. Haven't for quite a number of years.
Thank you. Since there's so few of us, and would it be interesting to go around and give a quick self-introduction so you know who you're talking to?
I know everybody here.
Well, Cole, would you introduce yourself?
Cole Campbell, just an interested person.
I'm Martha Spear. I'm the daughter of 2 artists, and I majored in art in college, and I am not an artist.
I'm Beth Gallagher and I love to support the artists.
Felicia Gallagher, 40 years. Oh, I grew up here. And then I moved to Boston and did Power the Healing Woods through performing arts, storytelling movement. But I didn't paint. I had all the kids painting and doing all this wonderful stuff. So I've come back home and I'm experimenting with painting for myself.
I moved here 7 years ago when Felicia married a Gallagher. I became instantly famous in Saranac Lake.
My dad was a major teacher. My mom a major musician.
Which means I had to keep, keep from getting myself in trouble.
My name is Falaka. I used to live in Saranac Lake. I was a press photographer here, and I've come here to heckle more.
I'm Peter Seward. We live just down the hill. Just an FYI, we're hosting some model sessions Tuesday.
Where is it?
We'll compare notes, but in this community, I'm gonna start a weekly drawing, figurative drawing. Mostly for
And recently enshrined by Joe, and I live at Lake Flower Landing. Artist, head of my own studio, 20 years in New York and then 20 years here.
Cool. Hey, I'm Joe. I'm a caricature artist.
Wellington,
Thank you, everybody.
oh, Willsboro, sorry.
So the reason we're here today is to find out from these 4 incredible folks what made them an artist. What was the tipping point? How did they get there? And who would like to go first?
I'll get it out of the way.
Okay.
How long do I have? 3 minutes?
You have as long as you want.
No, don't say that. I didn't have art in high school. I remember as a small boy, I liked to draw a lot. And so when I went to college, I had a concentration in history. I went to St. Michael's College in Vermont. So a liberal arts education, that one of the purposes is to find what you want to do. So late junior year, I wasn't having much fun at school. Joined a glee club, couldn't sing. So I said, oh yeah, I like to draw as a kid. So I took a painting class. In 4 hours, I painted this painting of a picture in the front of Vermont Life magazine. I did it in 2 classes. And I thought, oh, it was pretty good. I didn't know how good it was until everyone was, oohing and ahhing over it. And I sold it to the president of the college for $200. I thought, I'm going to be rich. $50 an hour. I work out that. But so from that point on, I got married and then moved to Florida, jobs in commercial art, drafting, architectural delineation, working out of prison, teaching black and white photography, darkroom and everything. A whole bunch of stuff. I decided I need to go back to school and get my degree in arts and what. We went back to Philadelphia, and Philadelphia University. It took 2 years, but 1 year was in Rome. So got that degree, went back to Florida, decided I need my master's. So we went to New York City for 3 consecutive summers, 1 in New York and 2 in Venice. Amazing. And then after that, I started teaching full time at a private school in West Palm, Florida. And that's when I did my thing of teaching during the day, and then right afternoon I go back and work on my own work, which looks absolutely nothing like what you see here. So one quick note to complete this. I did a series of pieces, wall constructions, semi-realistic shaped. And I did about 11 of them, was really excited. And then we decided to move back. And at which point I said, I'm going to forget all the university training and I'm just going to paint nature. So I completely did a turnaround. Now, I'm not at the end of my career, but now I'm picking up that thread from 40 years ago in my barn. Got track lights. I'm so excited at my age to start something new to me that I started 4 years ago. So I'm really jazzed about it.
Will be something we'll be able to say, like, is it the towns?
Yeah, they're kind of hard to move. I have no idea what I'm going to do. I'll be discovered. But
That's fascinating.
Didn't you live in Florence for a while?
No.
Just Rome and Venice.
2 summers. Yeah. No, we've been there, but 2 summers in Venice.
Venice?
Yeah, and NYU rented the Palazzo Grazi on the Grand Canal, and I had 2 balconies on the Grand Canal for 2 summers.
Did it affect your future of your art?
Yeah. It energized everything that I do. I didn't know anyone could be so excited about something in life. And even after the build up to that point. So I've had little signposts in my life that has created a great deal of energy for me, either shift gears or to re-engage in something that has been stewing my mind all these years. But I love to teach, so that sideline. It's been hard, but long journey.
Was Saranac kind of like equivalent to the power and beauty that you grew up in?
I never appreciated it until I came back 16 years later. That's why I wanted to paint. Love painting. Yeah.
Thank you, Tim. What about Nathalie?
So I guess I approached storytelling in a sort of ass backwards kind of way. Obviously, my job, I understand narrative, and growing up youngest of 6 girls, I had to fight to be heard. But what sort of formalized my storytelling was my actual job. So we do a Howl Story Slam. And part of the program is that we have staff, myself, and then someone from our partner on CPR will always tell either the first or the last story of the night. And there's a lot of reasons why we do that. And one of them is that because it's so unique and had not been done here, we wanted to model what a story actually looks like. And so that was one of there's a bunch of reasons also programmatically why it's important to do it. So I started telling stories, and I always assumed I just really loved making people laugh, because I really, really, really love making people laugh. And most of my stories are really funny, and that, you know, when I had a whole audience just losing it, I felt really great. And then I started being asked to tell stories in other capacities. People started contracting me or asking me to do stories outside of ECW, just as myself. And some of the things that I'm asked to tell stories about were not funny. And then I realized, I'm like, oh shit, no, I just like manipulating people's emotions. And so I enjoy telling any kind of story, sad story or poignant. And I've gotten rather nerdy about it. And there are stories that I'm very, very proud of because they're not particularly dependent on any strong emotion, and those are harder to tell. And if I can do that successfully, I'm really proud of myself. So I kind of came to this, and we've been doing it for almost 9 years now. So for 9 years, I've been telling stories in audiences twice a month, sometimes more than that, sometimes never really less than that. And then in different ways too. So in addition to crafted storytelling, I can do something that I made up, and it's called spontaneous storytelling, where you can just give me a word and I can tell a story right then and there, based on that prompt. So you could say like purse, and I can tell a story based on that. That's how many stories I have. And so that was also really fun. It was hard for me because they're less well crafted, so I had to sort of swallow my pride a little bit, but in the name of doing it quickly, sort of like on spot kind of caricature sort of thing. So that's how I came about it, was sort of oddly, like I had this tradition of storytelling and narrative, but as far as doing it on stages in front of people, it was actually because of my job that I had to start doing it. And then it became something I really love a lot. And it's been a big part of my life, and I'm actually really pleased when other people ask me to tell stories other than when I have to. Also, that means I can tell the story I want to. As a host, I can't always tell the story I want because my job is to make people feel very comfortable. And so my job is to tell a story that is not terribly well crafted and that maybe makes me look a little silly or, you know, makes a mistake or something, because I don't want other people coming up, especially amateurs, to have to come up and follow something like perfect, right? So I can't often tell, and I certainly can't tell a sad story. I was the host, right? And so I often can't tell all the stories I want. And so when I'm asked to tell a story in another capacity, so it's fun for me because then I can tell any story I want in any way.
Mark.
I'll vouch for her storytelling. I would come into the studio sometimes and would have to tell me about what happened to her that day. Some particular thing that happened to her, and they were often quite funny. Quite funny. The best one was putting the dog in the stomach thick and stuff. I'm a photographer. I always liked taking pictures, going way back. And the first actual photographic darkroom experience I had was actually in 8th grade. And that was the first time I worked in the darkroom, and I thought that was all pretty cool. Took a photography class in high school. Had a camera that actually had adjustments on it, which I had to really think about shutter speed and that kind of stuff and how it impacted the picture. That was the first time I got into that. And took a class in community college when I was in Rochester, photography class. I really didn't learn anything because I already knew everything they taught me in that class. And then I decided after I graduated from Monroe Community College to go on to RIT. Of course, I'm in Rochester, that's where you would go. And I did. And one year I left before they threw me out because my grades had deteriorated to the point where they were really awful. And it was only the experience, I look back on it now, and it was really almost like a non-experience for me. And so I worked in the ski business for several years because that was something that I would liked and I was pretty good at, and it just seemed like a cool lifestyle. But during my 20s, it seemed like I was changing directions every time I turned around, and finally got to the latter part of my 20s and thought, knew that someday I wanted to go back to school and get my bachelor's degree. I just knew I wanted to go back to school and get my degree at some point. And I got thinking that the one thing in my life that I just kept coming around to was photography. Always photography just stayed there all the time. I like skiing and I like working in the business, but I didn't see myself continuing working in that industry. So I decided to commit to something at least long enough to get a degree instead of changing my direction every 8 months. It seemed like that's what was happening. And I thought going back to school, and I wanted to do it in photography. I was limited to going to a state school because that's what I could afford tuition wise. I found the New York State College of Ceramics at Alfred University, which as it turns out was a great combination. It was a private university, but it had the New York State College of Ceramics, which is part of SUNY. So it was SUNY tuition to go to a private university. And I got there, started going to school. And my photography up to that point, just so you understand, was more pretty fall colors and sunsets and that kind of stuff. And I got to Alfred and I was there for like a week or two and I'm going, this is a really artsy art school. I don't know if this is really what I wanted. Not knowing really what I wanted. But I did say to myself, you said you would commit to this throughout. And so I decided, we're just going to stay with this and go with it. Within a month and a half, I was like, this is the best thing I ever chose to do. And it was a transformational 3 years for me. Completely transformational, not only as an artist, but I think as a person as well. I picked up art education along the way because I had a teaching background, teaching skiing, things like that. Not a formal teaching background, but I picked up art along the way, which was a good call for me. Graduated from Alfred, did quite well at Alfred, did some things there that stood out in the art school overall, the kind of work I was doing. I found that out when I came back to visit a year later, and it was pointed out to me some of the work I'd done the previous year was actually impacted choices that students were making that year on directions they were going as photography students anyway. But I did pick up a teaching position right out of college. At that point, I'm in my early 30s. And it was a job that I could start to, pay bills and things like that because I needed one. I'd been kind of screwed around for 3 years at that point, being in art school. And I always wanted to live in the Adirondacks. I had been up here as a Boy Scout and I worked at Boy Scout camp and did canoe trips up here and everything else. And I wanted to live in the Adirondacks. So I took a teaching position in Northville down the southern Adirondacks, which was actually a part of the Adirondacks I wasn't familiar with at all. Did that for 2 years and left only because I really wanted to pursue the photography full time. I liked my job, even though it was the lowest paying school district in the entire state. But I liked the job. And but I wanted to pursue the photography. Wound up in Saranac Lake, a bit by serendipity. I did have my summer job working for Boy Scouts, finished up. My sister and her husband were putting up a house and they needed to get it enclosed with heat in it before winter came. And I said, I'll stick around if you'll cover the cost just of my being here to help you get it at that point. And somebody told me that a friend of mine who lived here said that the Chamber of Commerce was looking for a photograph for the cover of their little trifold brochure. And I went over and I talked to him about it. I said, yeah, we haven't found anything yet. Had to be a vertical. Found 3 photographs that I gave them, 3 vertical shots. Never occurred to me that you could actually crop a horizontal to vertical. And the ad agency wound up picking that shot and they said they wanted to look more at my stuff. And the ad agency was Ad Workshop. So I took some stuff over and showed it to them. We chatted for a while and they hired me to photograph all the cross country and downhill ski areas in the Adirondacks that winter. It was all I Love New York money back then. It was in the late 80s. And there was a lot of that money out. So they hired me to do that. And I said, my thought was that I would move back to Rochester, which is where I was from. That's a photo city. That's where I would go back to start my career. How to do it, I had no idea. I said, well, this is a job. I'll stick around and do it at least through the winter, and then I'll make a decision on what I want to do. Maybe get back to Rochester or whatever. And 35 years later, I'm still here. Still doing it.
How did you get involved in the Winter Carnival shows?
I needed the work.
I know, but was that immediately after you had workshop stuff or?
I was shooting in 88 89 and 90, and I think the first Winter Carnival I shot was in 91. And a couple of people told me, who worked at the Chamber of Commerce said, you know, you ought to do the Winter Carnival slideshow, which in my immediate thought, that was pretty overwhelming to try and pull something like that together. And there was somebody already doing it. And somebody said, there were challenges between some people on the Winter Carnival Committee and the person that was doing it. Probably if you went in and submitted a proposal, they'd probably be real interested in it. And I needed the work. I was looking for jobs. So I had done a slideshow for Alpo Pet Foods on the sled dog races that I'd been hired to do. But that I had, we did the shooting, I had many months to put that together.
Right.
You don't have that with Winter Carnival, which I learned real fast. And so I did make a pitch, they hired me. And then I started doing it in 1991 and didn't stop until 2020. But it came out of not some altruistic thing of wanting to be part of the community, blah, blah, blah. It was, I needed the work and I thought that would be a decent job.
Did you have people shooting for you in 91?
Yes, actually a friend of mine from art school. She was living in Boston area and I wanted somebody else that I really could trust and felt good about not only her work, but her sense of organization and everything else. Called her up and I said, hey, I'll pay you, I forgot what it was, to just come for the weekend. She came for the second weekend and she was wonderful. She was great. Not only her photography, but there was a couple times where like something went wrong.
Right.
Happened everyone Carnival. But it's like, what do we do? And she was presence of mind. The two of us worked it through and we pulled off the slideshow. So yes, that first year I did hire somebody to work with me on it.
Mark. Last but not least.
Yeah, okay, so getting to be the artist I am today, if I am. As a kid growing up, we had pianos and stuff in the house, and I was always banging on them. I took piano lessons when I was 8 for a while. I didn't survive long in piano lessons because something about it irritated me, but I was always banging on the piano. I grew up in a house that was full of all the big band recordings from the 40s and 50s. I grew up in Sandusky, Ohio, and the big bands all came through there along the lake with all these resort stops. My parents were crazy about them and danced and stuff. So they had all these records, we grew up with all that stuff. And was in 7th grade was the earliest you could be in band they had. So I started playing in the school band. And in 7th grade, by 8th grade, I was playing with some guys in a rock band. 9th grade was 9th through 12 was high school there. I was in the marching band, loved that. I was in the marching band for my first 2 years of high school. The fat prick who was the band boss ran me out because I was playing rock and roll music. This was 1966. Kept playing rock music, went to college, kept playing music while I was in college. I also got into theater arts, doing stage production stuff, not acting. When I graduated from college in 1972, my first real job was playing rock and roll for a living. I was in a band that did all original material. This was in Columbus, Ohio. And I did nothing but that for, a number of years, which was pretty amusing in the early 70s. Very entertaining. Didn't make any money at all, but we figured out one time at the end of a number of years what our income looked like in the band, and it was like $80 a week. Anyway. So I stayed with it. Eventually I got into entry-level jobs working with people with disabilities as a day job. So I had a little more income and fairly quickly got into leadership. And by late 70s, early 80s, I was in an executive position. I was an executive from then until 2015. doing that stuff, but I never stopped playing music, but it was pretty hard to be a gigging musician with the time schedule I was in, because I was on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week from 1976 until I retired from 2015. But I always had it. It was always a part of my life. Maybe 17, 18 years ago, the old band decided to make the record we never made and started, books and recording time. And it was in Toledo, Ohio, which is 650 miles away, running back and forth. I got to be able to figure out a way to record bass tracks at home and send them to these guys, right? So I went to a friend who was a very accomplished studio guy, did a lot of work for public TV stations and stuff, had a big studio, and asked him, like, can I do this? I have a Macintosh and I know they can do music. And his answer to me was like, yes, you can, but you're better off buying studio time from somebody else, because if you start down this road in 5 years, you'll be mortgaging your house to buy a bigger board, right? And I've managed to avoid that, but it's been costly putting it together. But once I retired, I started really working at it, and you got to really work at it too. I mean, it's like the whole theory about, what is it? 10,000 hours is, mastery of something. So I worked on that discipline and really started working hard on it in the last 5 years. I did some recording for people starting about 12 years ago, off and on. But in terms of getting to the point where I was really, my soul was sunken into it, it's been like the last 6 years. I got a couple of quotes I want to share that relate, and I pulled up these quotes because I thought it would help me keep things a little short. Because I mentioned that, the three elements, there's the recording part, there's the mixing part, and the mastering part. I spend a lot of time thinking about, like, is what I'm doing a craft or is it an art? Where's that line? And I've kind of come to the conclusion that for me, recording is a craft. Setting stuff up right, making sure your equipment's working, it's a craft. But mixing and mastering is the art, and that's the part that I really enjoy, and it's a part that's spiritual for me. Here's a couple of quotes that kind of relate to that. First is from Bob Dylan. The highest purpose of art is to inspire. What else can you do? What else can you do for anyone but inspire? And then sort of the other side of that coin, kind of on the craft side, from Immanuel Kant, man must be disciplined, for he is by nature raw and wild. Right? So there's the inspiration, spiritual part, but you got to know what you're doing. You got to know how to draw the line, or how to, work all those different adjustments on the camera.
How to kill your darling.
And then I have a couple there's a book that has been out for a while, not too long, by a genius record producer named Rick Rubin. Never heard of him. You've heard music that he had to do. And this book was the bestseller on the New York Times. And it's a fascinating book, and it's not just about music recording. It's about inspiration in art. So two quotes from that. The object isn't to make art; it's to be in that wonderful state which makes art inevitable.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. The object isn't to make art; it's to be in that wonderful state which makes art inevitable. And that's a quote from Robert Henri in his book, in Rick Rubin's book. And I think these are his words in another part of the book. The ability to look deeply is the root of creativity, to see past the ordinary and mundane and get to what might otherwise be invisible. So I didn't have go to school, formal schooling in this stuff, but I made a commitment pretty early on, which was a good choice, to use there's a number of different companies that make recording software that you create on the computer and emulation of the big old studio boards and stuff. Pro Tools is the one that most people use. I'm a big Apple fan, so I went with Apple Logic, which was actually originally developed in Germany by a separate company that they acquired. And in the days when I started doing this, you didn't have YouTube videos, and it was like, but I went to classes, you know, like 3-day weekend classes in New York City by the guys who eventually developed a lot of the top line video training stuff that's around, and learned that, you know, really learn the ins and outs of how to make everything work inside that box. That was still more craft development there. But I also found a place called the Manhattan Producers Alliance, music producers, that put on these weekend workshops where they bring in somebody fairly big time and they do, you know, 2.5 days on something. And like one of the guys that really meant a lot to me, a guy named Paul Special, who has been involved in the recording of all those, you know, the Clapton Crossroads Festival things and all that kind of stuff. And he now does, if you ever watch Good Morning America and enjoy the music on that, he does all the live mixes for Good Morning America. And, you know, works on the Emmy shows and all that. Anyway, got to do some 2-3 day workshops with him, which was really fascinating. And and it required a whole trip to New York City, but, you know, a couple of hour workshops. So learning the craft of it that way. And then, you know, as more stuff got online, reading things online. I'm not big on learning from YouTube videos because it's difficult if they're more than 2 minutes long. And a number of user groups, you know, on Facebook and whatnot. And I'm sort of a top contributor to some of those now, and people that are newbies keep saying like, well, I'm trying to do a mix and it doesn't sound right, and, you know, do you have any like good plugins I can use to get my mix to sound right? And my answer is always the same: record something every day and try to mix it, and do hundreds of bad mixes, and, you know, like, to the point where like you're like, oh yeah, that's pretty good. And that's kind of how I did it over the years. And the most recent fully completed project was that's published in a substantial way is the album I did with Blessed Dirt. They've been playing around here quite a bit. If you their stuff is all on Spotify and all the streaming services. If you haven't heard them, you'll go out and listen to it. And that's one that I set up a studio in their home with my B unit, and we left it there for months and recorded, and then we did the mixing, and then we did the mastering. So the whole production project was mine, and I'm very, very proud of how that came out, and so are they. You got to give them listen. But I also came to kind of accidentally, some different people had come to me with some projects that were already recorded, but they weren't right. And, you know, can you do something with this? And the first time it was like, yeah, you know, it sounds good. But it turned out to be a real love moment for me, because I love mixing and mastering, and that's where the art is for me, in taking things that were suboptimally done that don't sound good and making them sound great with a practice that was really good for me. And I'm working with somebody right now that had more than an album's worth of material they did at home that wasn't recorded very well. So anyway, but the spiritual part of this to me that I just, you know, brought me to some maturity with it is I do most of my mixing in the morning when my old ears are fresh, because they get stale pretty quickly. I get up really early, go out on the front porch, have coffee, look at the dogs, look at the farm, and, you know, and enjoy it. But I started tuning my ears out there, just trying to quiet my body and listen to there's birds here, there's birds there, there's noise and stuff falling on the porch roof, and try to listen to that like it's an orchestra. You know, try to hear each part individually. Oh yeah, there's that over there, and then try to hear it as a whole composition, but still hearing the parts individually. and without knowing it, that turned into a meditative practice, and I was getting in a pretty good meditative state. And then when I'd stop, I'd like go right in the studio, and I would just be there because I had the craft part of it down, and I'd get these, you know, these songs that weren't right, and just like, you know, and it would come. You'd fall in love with a piece, you serve the music, you know, and this Rick Rubin book is a very spiritual book, and to me, it's become the whole thing from starting on the porch in the morning to getting in the studio and doing the stuff is really a spiritual practice for me. And I had a lot of accomplishments in my life as an executive, but this is the most fulfilling thing I've ever done. And so that was becoming an artist.
You mentioned Robert Henri in The Art Spirit, the book. That what an impactful book that is, and it just ties right in all the things you're talking about.
So I'd like to open it up for anybody to ask questions or make comments or reflect from your own experience.
I just wanted, there's some things that Les said, that everybody said here, that got me thinking. And as I described my development as a photographer, I realized I was really talking about developing my work as a commercial photographer, which is how I make a living. And I often will say, you know, how do I make it all work? And I say, well, you know, I make my fine art photography, the stuff you frame, hang on a wall or whatever. But my day job is always that as a commercial photographer. And finding the place where the two kind of overlap is always, it's something I'm always trying to do, and it's always exciting when you can actually make that work, make that happen. And I remember at one point I shot a lot of weddings over the years, and you know, you can talk about art photography and shooting weddings, and we don't see where those are going to overlap. But in fact, for me, they actually did. And I remember a friend of mine, you know, making a comment when I was out shooting weddings. You know, he said, well, anytime you pick up a camera and are using it, you're honing your craft. Thing, and you're learning to more understand the tools you're working with and what you can do with them. And again, as an artist, trying to find the place where I can overlap being an artist with being a commercial artist or commercial photographer is an interesting thing when you can make that work. And I found some places that I could do that. Some parts of Winter Carnival, producing the Winter Carnival slideshow, I found that, especially later in the years, I found that I was actually being able to be more creative with some of the things I was doing. And that was always fun. And then something you said, that's the part that is spiritual for me. I never really been able to put words to, you know, where that is. And I thought that was a really good quote. We talked about finding that place. Because it's hard to make a living as an artist where that's all you do is produce fine art that people will come and buy and take home and hang on the wall, whatever it might be. That's not easy to do. And even though Tim was successful right out of the thing by selling that $200 painting, the reality set in shortly after that, probably found out that, you know, that's a hard way to make a living. And so you do the other part of, at least for me, sounded like for Les too, you have that other part of your craft / art, which you work and look for places you can overlap them to make it work from the standpoint of producing the kind of art, the part that is spiritual for one, and pay the bills at the end of the month too. That's a tricky thing to do.
Oh, I graduated from art school and I said, the only way my art will stay alive, it has to be my work. And then my whole life has been devoted creating, getting grants, being hired to perform. It seemed like my work ethic was really driven into me as a kid. Oh, you can't be an artist. You won't survive. But I will, because it's going to be my work.
We had a business for 25 years, basically based upon her work, your inspiration.
Yeah. You just, there's just that commitment that has to kick into you to commit. I mean, it is a beautiful commitment.
I'm not sure that there's a division between art and commerce. I mean, you're talking about finding the art in the commercial work. But if you're going to make a living as a fine artist, you got to do a lot of commerce as well. You know, promote yourself and, you know, map the pictures and frame and hustle. So I'm not entirely sure that there's such a big distinction. I mean, it's like two sides of the coin. You know,
Yeah. I've talked to lots of artists through the years in my studio because I try to draw it out of them.
right?
You know, how are you making it? How are you doing it? What's your background? One common, there's a number of common things going through it, but one is they're all different. And they all approach things in a different way because they have different experiences. Now, the idea between jumping into the mainstream, sell your work, as opposed to creating something that is for yourself. That's a hard, you know, you get up in the morning, you're thinking, is this for my business? Is this for me? Do I sell this? Do I want to continue? So it's a gut check on a daily basis. It's not like something that you resolve right away. This is my own experience. So you really have to think about this. And so you think artists tend to think with their gut more than their brain. Sometimes that's a really great thing, spiritual thing versus a practical thing. And I think that's going to carry you further and make you more happy as time goes on. But at the same time, you don't want to be a martyr. You don't want other people around you to be happy because you're not pulling your weight. So that's why it's a complicated business, and it's unlike any other business. And many people resolve it in a different way. I had my paintings of nature downstairs, and they weren't scenic things you see on the trail. They still are. And because when I originally started this journey, I said, I'm walking in the woods. I just it was wonderful. And I loved it. And turning point in that aspect was going to a large watercolor. Upstairs for quite a period of time, I had my other stuff. Right. So I became schizophrenic in a way. So commercial, love to do it. And then my other stuff upstairs. Now at the end of my career, end of my journey with the beautiful stuff, I'm going to keep my studio open for a while. I picked up on that spiritual thing. I had an amazing time making through the years. That's still in the barn. That I just finished a piece and I really like it. It probably won't sell, but it's part of a continuum that I started those years ago. So I've managed to keep my sanity, help pay the bills, doing it that way. But another artist can perhaps combine the two into a commercial career at the same time fulfilling the need to be genuinely authentic and creative as an artist. So I think that artist will resolve their approach to life and art in a different way than I will. So, I'd hate for a teacher to get up in front of the classroom to young art students and say, this is the way you do it. Make a portfolio, put a portfolio, make contacts. This, and then you build it from there. And my approach was very different when I taught at Potsdam. This is what is here. And these are notes from 15 years ago when I talked to the students. And not to prolong this, but I wanted them to concentrate on thinking like an artist, how they engage their community, how they live a creative life. So art is not part-time, but you do your job and you go home at night and paint. So what do you do during the day if you have a job? What do you think about your work? It's in the back of your mind. Sometimes you set goals. Okay, I want to have a show, one person show next year in such and such a place. And then while you're working, you're thinking about what is the strategy I'm going to have? What kind of style, what approach am I going to get to? That I can do something that maybe no one's seen in this area that I'm excited about. If you're thinking about it, things start to pop up that help you. You know, the universe helps you put these things out. And so when you get up in the morning, you're engaged in life as an artist. And every moment is fodder for your work. And so after all, as an artist, if you're not absorbing your experiences and somehow using them, giving them back to people, you know, I think you're disengaged from the purpose you have of actually committing your life to art. Now you can create art in the community, engaging others by bringing performances to the community, to creatively helping people with their finances, to create a warm and welcoming environment in your home that serves a great purpose of engaging with your friends and communal sort of thing, where they feel accepted. The same thing could be carried over to the community. How do you create a community that is welcoming to all creatives? Whether you're a woodworker, mechanic, someone's starting their own business, how do you create that open community? So I think Saranac Lake is a creative community. And I'd rather us use that term even more so than an arts. That still has a connotation of that's them. So that's my end of my speech. Oh, and by the way, if anyone wants me to talk to a group, whoever it is, it's excited me about all this stuff. This book is filled with things that I've learned through the years, and partially what I shared with my students at Potsdam State, and it has to do with building your strength as an artist, as a creative person. You can control that. You can't control all the others.
Speaking of creative community, I would like to mention to the audience, so you can mention it to other people, perhaps, that I do have some private grants that are funding a program that I'm doing at Griffin Dubois Records, where if there are in the area gigging musicians who have original material that they want to record, I can do that, record it, and produce a publishable, ready recording at no cost. It's especially because musicians got the crap beat out of them for the last 3 years with the plague and everything, and not that they don't get the crap beat out of them all the time anywhere. I just saw a joke in the paper, I think a cartoon. It was the guy from Back to the Future in the DeLorean, and he just came back and got by. He said, "I just came back from 2050, and musicians are still making $100 a gig." So that's something that's available. Again, the target is people that are active gigging musicians that have original material that they want to record. We can do that. I have my B unit that I can do remote recording with. Starting to work with Trestle Street. We're going to get some recording going there before too long, I think. between me and Russ Fair doing the the technical work, and David's doing the selling. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there for any of you that have musical connections or know any people that fit that criteria.
This is an amazing community to live in if you are a creative person. Because there's so much of, like what Les just described. I didn't know that was going on. He talked about connecting with Dave over across the street, and all these connections of creative people doing stuff and overlapping all over the place.
The Blessed Dirt album was actually the first project under that program.
I have a question for you. I have name blindness. What is your name again?
Les.
Okay. I know it's not serious. But I want to ask you, it's common for music to be recorded one place and then mastered another place. Have you done that? And do you feel like it's important, or do you feel like you can record it and master it all yourself?
Well, there's some really accomplished, famous mastering engineers that do nothing but that, and I have some level of contact with some of them. If you're in the big time, big budget, stuff like that, it would be typical to do your recording one place, have a separate guy in another place do the mix, and have a separate guy do the mastering. But the projects are compartmentalized, because when you're recording, there's one set of goals and parameters that you're working with. When you're mixing, it's a whole, it's very different. You're primarily working with levels and gain staging and what they call equalization, which is basically a very sophisticated, fancy tone control, and a thing called compression that makes the loud stuff a little quieter and the quiet stuff a little louder, and then brings it all up to where the loud stuff was to begin with. It makes it sound tighter. It's what you're used to hearing. You may not know that, but you're used to hearing stuff compressed quite a bit. I was concerned about starting down the path of trying to do all three, but the last 6 years, I've gotten very, very comfortable with it. I certainly wouldn't be offended if I was working with somebody and they wanted it mastered somewhere else or something like that. But I like my approach, particularly with in the grant program, is you can do a lot of back and forth with the artist. And I would never mix or master by the hour, because I love taking way more time than I should, and working on it for an hour and then not coming back the next day. And rather than, I'm not one of those guys that can sit down and do there's the mix, there's the master. I like feeling it and working with it and going back and forth with the artist. And I've done mixing with the artists in the room, with a whole band in the room, and we're doing the mix in a mixing session. And I've done some good mixes that way, but I hate it. Yeah. I'd rather get their impressions of what my first draft is, make some tweaks, send it, go back and forth. Because I want it to express what I want to express in terms of what I think the music needs, to serve their music, not to serve me. But I want their feedback, because if you just sit down and do what they tell you, they're not going to like it, because they don't really know the details of what you're doing, and they may not even know the right term to express it. So that's kind of, and I have done some projects where I just mastered something that was already mixed, and I've done, as I mentioned, I've done projects where people bring me recordings to remix or do an initial mix and then put a master finish on it there. Because now there's people, I'm working with a young man now, he's not he's been a very accomplished musician, but he wants to be able to produce this through the mentoring program that grew out of this, the slam at, in the basement over there. He wants to be able to record songs at home and release them as singles on, on the streaming services. Because he's worked on albums and they take years to do, and all these people involved and stuff. And he knows how to record fairly well, so I'm working with him to set up the recording system that he can record the tracks and then send, mix them and master them for him, and he could, get him out on Spotify.
Thank you, Les. We are at time, and I would like to give Nathalie the opportunity to spontaneously wrap this up with a beautiful story.
Are you kidding me?
If you have the energy.
Sponge. Throw a word at you.
Pressure.
No.
You want me to tell a story like for reals?
I think that you have spoken least of our 4 artists.
Okay, well, rather than do that, I'll say the one thing that I wasn't gonna say, I just didn't wanna prolong it, but when, just riffing off of the 3 of you, I mean, I guess you could tell a story, but, there's something I wanted to say, which was sort of when you were talking about commercial art versus, what you do for yourself. I think one of the things that might be different in the storytelling art form is that, or any sort of performative art form, is that, I learn something every time I craft a story and about myself. And so the difference between an anecdote is when you tell what happens, and a story is when you explain why that happened. And so most people tell anecdotes, even on stage, they don't know. And you can hear a good story, that's the difference because you understand why. So when I have been telling the same anecdotes for years, I sit down and craft a story and I start to wonder why, even if it's something silly, like I had this story about a series of anecdotes, my first waitressing job in a cowboy restaurant. I just made such epic mistakes, And I would always tell people and they would always laugh about this. But when I came to crafting my story, I was like, what was wrong with me? Like, why was I making so many mistakes? And then I realized that it was because I was having an identity crisis. For the first time ever, I was in a community that saw me differently than I had ever been seen before. I had always been seen smart and cool, no matter where I went in the whole world. And then suddenly I'm in with these cowboys and they didn't think I was smart and cool, and it messed with me. And so I was just always constantly trying to prove myself and prove my worth. And I had this huge identity crisis. And I learned that by crafting my story. I learned that about myself. So I could tell the story in a way that made the whole audience laugh. And people were sending me things afterwards and, talking to me and this and that. But what I learned, I got to keep. And that's one of the things about art, is that regardless if people buy it or not, or blah, 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 the spiritual aspect you carry with you. And I've learned more about myself as a storyteller. And my own experiences have been reflected back to me. And the same story I can see through a different lens, and I've learned and grown through my art here, whether the audience sees it or hears it or not. And that is, one thing pays the bills, but the other thing is what, we were all talking about is the actual art that propels us. And so you might not see it, if someone's, I'm a huge proponent of stand-up. I think comedians are geniuses. But what you don't realize is the journey that they have. Like, people just sort of often think that just because you're laughing, there's not a lot of thought and intentionality behind it. But if you're making people laugh or cry or whatever, if you're able to tell a story, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Everything that you carry with you to get to that point is why we do it. I think I love the attention for sure. But really it's what it's what I grew in me, that allowed me to perform it in the first place.
Thank you, Nathalie. That's a great way to end. Thank you, everybody, very much.
You told a story about telling stories.
I did.
Please eat and drink, and I hope that people will take the food home with them.
There's a book, little book here, I think. Created, should buy and use. I'll leave it here if you want to let her take a picture of it.
You want to just.
First thought.
Yeah. I was just grabbing.
You wouldn't need me to record a podcast, but I could sit up and.
Thank you.
It's sort of a mix still. Support the voice the right way and then you get master.
One that,
Most people that have half week.
Yeah, it's on the.
okay, yeah.
Something we didn't get into.